Hello, everyone, and you are all very welcome to this Bloomsday live workshop for families with Jen O'Brien. My name is Heidi, and myself and my colleague Justina will be in the background if you need any assistance. If you have any questions or if you need Jen to slow down or to repeat anything, please do pop that into the Q&A and we can interrupt her and let her know that you need anything done. So without further delay, I'm going to hand you over to Jen and enjoy your workshop, and happy Bloomsday.
Hello everyone, happy Bloomsday. Today is a day to embrace our creativity and imagination by celebrating the wonderful James Joyce and his magical mind. So we will take a stroll through a special seascape, one dear to Dublin, taking a scene in Ulysses where Joyce's character Stephen walks through Sandymount Strand. Am I walking into eternity along Sandymount Strand? And indeed, Sandymount Strand offers a sense of infinity. James Joyce himself could be walking into the future, the now 2021, where he'd come across the Poolbeg chimneys. Although our iconic stacks were not around in Joyce's time, I think that he would have a lot to say about them now. And if anyone would like to incorporate them into their image, feel free to do so, and you can give them a lick of paint, because that's what they could do with a nice lick of paint these days. So yeah, again, with the materials, as Heidi was saying, it's really what you have, but I put an extravagant list because for anyone who's very interested in watercolor, I just wanted to show you all the different ways you can use it by using crayons, paint, pencils. So what we might do is we're going to begin by, you can always, if you're doing watercolor, just play around with a sketchbook, put a little couple of shapes in and images. I took some photographs myself there as well of Sandymount Strand. So if there's anyone who would like to see one, I did also email it over. We can put that up. This image here, if anyone doesn't have one on hand, you can just ask Justina or Heidi. There's one in the email there. And if not, I have one here that I can show you. So we'll have a think about Sandymount Strand right now and what we might incorporate into the image. I think I will begin with the sky, and then we're going to focus in on creating the lovely weed-grown rocks along Sandymount shore, exactly how Joyce himself describes it. So beginning, we'll do a wet on wet technique. Again, anyone who would like to do gray clouds, blue clouds, it's really up to yourself what color you use. I'm going to just do a nice vibrant blue because I think that it's, I don't know, I suppose we had lots of blue sky there a while ago, but now it's gone gray again. And then I'll bring in some of the gray, but this is a paper palette I'm using just to give you an idea. You can use a plate or any kind of porcelain palette either. I'm just using a round watercolor brush. Oops. I use a big mop brush to get my skies down, and we'll mix the paints first. Just going to lift this up so everyone can see. Just going to mix my ultramarine blue there, and you can use a cobalt blue either. Sometimes we see a bit of cerulean blue in the sky as well, and also mixing it with a little bit of a Chinese white. The good thing about watercolor is you're very much using the white of the page, so you don't always have to use you'd use a Chinese white maybe for clouds and things like that, or you could use a gouache to make it less transparent. Just going to mix that properly here. That's what happens when you have your paints stuck to the palette. So just give it a good mix of water first. And remember, you don't have to, you can have a nice white page as well. Start with our lovely sky. Just mixing that in, getting our blues ready here. And although I'm using a very light color for the sky, I'm also going to just do a quick demonstration of how wet on wet works. And I'm going to do that before I do our sky on just a little bit of sample paper. So just to give you an idea, when you are doing a sky, for those of you who might want to do a very dramatic wet on wet, just holding it up to the screen there. Cover your entire piece of paper. This is now, this is cold press, which means that it's got a lovely bit of roughness to it. And a hot press would be quite smooth. So you just place your water along the whole page there. And I'm just going to put it down here. Just let me know if you can still see it. And if not, I can hold it up. Getting your page nice and soaked there. And just to show this demonstration, I had pre-mixed some blues. And I'm just going to show you here, this is a nice deep blue. And what you do is you just, when the page is wet, just immediately press it down like that, allow it to go into the corners, and then mix it with loads of white. And then just working into the page quite fast, allowing the colors to just move. You can go in with your tissue as well and just kind of, and remember today's workshop, it's really just an experiment, you know, just building an image, just an introduction as well to watercolor. And you can always look back over it if you wanted to do one for a longer amount of time. You can get your lovely moody clouds this way as well. Maybe mix in a bit of dark there if you like. Because let's be honest, our clouds are mostly very grey. But the grey looks lovely against the nice red stacks, which is at least something. So that's to give you an idea of the wet on wet, just with darker colours. And now we'll go in after we've done our little practice run. And this is a hot press paper, which means that it's completely smooth. I think it works very well if you're doing any illustrations of any botanical illustrations, because it's nice and it takes the pen and it takes pencils and everything. So we'll actually use our big mop brush. Just soak the page. It's always good when you are using watercolors, just to remember when you're putting your hand on the page, it's good to have it taped down as well, but to just put a bit of tissue paper on the page here so that your hands aren't leaving grease stains on it, because when that does happen, the paint won't take, unfortunately. So starting with our sky, and we can add in the rocks and the stacks if we like, and then we will, if for some of you who might like to add the sea, that snot green sea as Joyce describes it. So we've got a nice, nicely coated page here. And we're going to take our palette again, and I'm just going to add a little, just get a good bit of water there, good bit of blue, more. So this is the Chinese white, which is nicely stuck to the palette. And just get that in there. And we'll give our page the base first, and then we can always add clouds and everything like that afterwards. Do layers and layers. Just getting a nice coated sky there, and it's lovely and translucent still, which I think is really nice with the watercolor. It just makes it look quite smooth. You can always add after. So we'll just leave our sky aside, and we'll start creating our lovely wheat-grown rocks along Sandymount shore. And that grainy sand had gone from under his feet. James Joyce, Ulysses. So as you can see, we've got a lovely coated page with the nice light sky, which we can always build up. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set that aside, let it dry. And then we're going to start doing some rocks. Because interestingly enough, Sandymount Strand is always has a lovely widespread flower around it. It's just this lovely kind of crazy little weed called the mayweed, and it's just everywhere. So it's lovely to look out for it. So for the rocks here, I'm just using a rough texture page. Now, what I've done is I've just used scraps of paper that I wasn't using again, that are maybe a bit crumpled, that I couldn't use for anything else. And they can be very nice for collage. So they work for that. And your rocks can be whatever color you want. They can be, you know, multicolors, whatever you think of. But what I'll do is I'm just going to show different grays that we can make. And you can make beautiful grays with burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw umber. So I'm just going to do a few different ones. And you can make grays also by just mixing the ultramarine with all these different brown varieties. So it's just getting all that different grays. The lovely thing about the cut up technique as well is it means that when you do kind of chop them out, you can decide where you'd like to place them and where you might like to place the stacks or that lovely weed. It's kind of, for those of you who don't know what the mayweed looks like, it looks like a daisy, kind of a chunkier daisy. So there we have a nice gray that could come up from, I suppose, all that awful seaweed. Well, I mean, Dublin seaweed. Seaweed in general is quite lovely. And what we'll do is we'll let this dry and then we can chop it up. We could do maybe a bit of a warmer gray now. Again, brown that's stuck to the page. So now this is a burnt sienna. And you know, if all you have is red, yellow, and blue, you could be doing really amazing colored rocks that have all the vibrant colors in the color wheel. So now getting a nice warm gray. You can do that wet and wet technique as well. Allow the colors to kind of run into one another. Sometimes watercolor works quite well on brown card as well. It can look nice with collage. And then we can just add that there. Then we can add a little bit more blue maybe just to get that color looking a bit more gray. And our blue sky is coming along, it's drying there, which is good. Now for another gray, we could go in and get maybe a purpley gray by adding some of our red. And then just putting it in here and adding some of the grays there. And there we go. There's a little bit of a purpley kind of a gray there. And then just allowing that to, they're also lovely sea colors. And we could add a little bit more from for our rocks there. Sorry, excuse me, everyone. I'm just gonna, there's a little bit of background noise. So if you just give me 2 seconds and I'm just gonna plug something in very quickly. Apologies, everyone. I just had to mute the background noise. So we've got a lovely array of gray here. I'm just going to do the wet on wet technique towards the end of the page. So we've some grays there. And bringing back our lovely blue, we could maybe start putting the sand down. The grainy sand had gone from under his feet. So let's see, with the grainy sand, what you could do, I think it's quite nice to use contrasting colors. But what you can do is often with watercolor, what is very nice is to use, as I had in the list, sometimes black pen works very well with watercolors, even a simple black pen drawing with some watercolor on top. And if you did want to take inspiration from the grainy sand, as you can see here, I'm just going to hold this picture up. There's a little bit of, you know, all of that lovely rippling in the sand. We can add some texture to it just with some black pen. So you can just do that by simply just doing some stippling. You probably wouldn't really be able to see it too much. Now, you don't need to do this, but it's just nice to give a little bit of texture to your ground. And then just to know where we might put that sand. And we're going to do some of the lovely rocks that you can see there. There's such a wide variety of rocks. It's quite funny because I did see a few, I have once or twice seen a really cheeky little rat come out of the rocks. So you could put a little rat in there, or you could put some of the seagulls if you felt like that, or pigeons, you know, the lovely city creatures that you'd find on a city beach. Now, I think what I'll do for the sand is, what you can do is you can have a very nice contrasting color going through, or you can bring a little bit of the colors that you're using within the other tones, like the sky or the rocks. You can kind of bring that into it as well. So I think for the sand, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some of that lovely, I think a bit of gray, all of the colors that you've used, you can just do that if you like. And I'm going to place that down just on the sand. Let's see, it is quite a gritty sand. And this is just, take it as a section from Sandymount Strand. So it's kind of the section where there would be a little bit of wildflowers and green. And all of those lovely, interesting rocks. I think we could go a little bit bluer on the sky as well, just to kind of enhance. But we can do that after if we wish. Add some of that texture. It's funny, the sand on Sandymount Beach is mostly kind of a grayish color. We've just got a very, very, very simple base there. And we're just going to let that dry. And for those of you who want to use really vibrant colors, please do, because that can make for a very interesting piece as well. So we're going to let them dry to the side. And then I think it would be nice that we do the stacks separately, because they weren't there at Joyce's time, but we can put them in wherever we like, and we can make them as small or as big as we like. So that's why I think it would be good to do them separately, and then we can collage them on as well. I can run through a few things here, and these are just to give you an idea. These are watercolor crayons, and they work really, really well as a texture over watercolor, or even as a base as well. For example, you know, if you're using, let's say, a gray one, you can go on top of one of these grays, and to give it a bit of a rocky texture, you can just add that by just using your crayon on top of some of your paints. And it's just really versatile watercolor. You can do so much with it. Could also be interesting to use really vibrant colors on top of the rocks, you know, some people spray paint them, so. And now for our stacks. Remember, the stacks can be as big or as small as you like. So if you do have spare pieces of paper, feel free to draw loads of stacks. But I will just start drawing it on this with this is a variety of pen sizes, but if you did want to just use one size, then I would just go with a 0.1. For those of you who want to do very fine detail, you can do a 0.5, or you can just use, again, whatever you have lying around. You'd be surprised at using what you have creates unbelievably interesting pieces as well. So I'm just going to draw those stacks. You can take a look at your image there as well if you need inspiration, or just even think about the shapes, you know, as Joyce says, shut your eyes and see. So if you were to even shut your eyes and imagine what the chimney stacks look like, it's like you have an image in front of you. So I'm just going to move the palette aside so that you can see me draw the stacks. And one is taller than the other. So I'm just going to do mine very, very rough. And they may not even be the right size for the page, but I'm going to do a few different sizes because it might be nice to show that sense of eternity, as he says, you know, very, very far away stacks. Do a few more here if we like. A bit thicker at the bottom, thinner at the top. I always think it would be so much fun if they had a slide that one could use on the stacks and go into a nice clean sea. So yeah, don't be fussy about your stacks. You know, they don't have to be perfect sizes. I know some people might want to measure them and use rulers, but actually it could work out really nice that they're not perfect either, you know, so feel free to just even have them as a suggestion. So for this, as we know, our stacks aren't in real life a luminous red. So for those of you, I can show you on top a lovely crayon technique that you can give them a little bit of rust. And what we can do as well is you can always use your black pen. You don't have to because you might want it very, very bright, vibrant, but you can even see in this image here that they're, well, you might not be able to see that, but they're quite rusty. So feel free to have them as rough as you like. The nice thing about these pens, which is the Uni pen, is that you can kind of just place the pen down. It always looks really, really good, but it's waterproof. So it means that when you put your watercolor on top, they're not gonna blend or smudge, but they will leave that lovely liney texture. And I'm just doing it very roughly like that, just to give an idea of what can work really well with watercolor. So even if any of you had any kind of non-waterproof black pen, so think about all the smoke that you could have coming out of the stacks if you felt like it. That's another chance to do a lovely wet on wet technique. Got 2 sets here, but I think I might do one another size as well. Just might do them, the option of doing them very small so that you can see all the different ways that we can manipulate the distance. And again, our image doesn't have to be perfectly in proportion because it's more about the feeling that we get when we see a very familiar strand. That's a lovely one. I have to say, I love all the cranes and how they light it up at Christmas. I think it always looks so interesting. So this is hot press watercolor paper that I'm using here, and it's probably about, I think it's probably 300 GSM. I think if you're doing a painting, try not to have your, you know, a painting like this, it should be no less than 300 GSM really, unless you're doing a very light water illustration. But if you're doing something where you're basing the whole page, I do think it needs to have a bit of thickness in it. And for those of you who are really very interested in watercolor, I do think Fabriano and Arches are very good brands. But you can also get a really lovely, cheaper Fabriano in a sketchbook. I think that one's it's a great one to use as well. Got our stacks here and all their wonderful stripes. Just leave them. So, and we might give them a lick of paint now, because our main page, now we can make this more vibrant at the end, but it's always good. I find when you're doing a painting, it's kind of nice to hop around the painting so you're not getting too stuck on one area, and then you can kind of build it up if you like, because starting kind of minimal and then building it up can be the nice way to go, or you can just go wild from the beginning, whichever way. Now we're going to just get our red here. And just to show you, these are some of the watercolor brushes. Synthetic ones are perfectly fine. And just if you are interested in watercolor, I think the synthetic ones always get a one that is an actual watercolor brush, because it holds the water very well. Now we're just going to get our red. I'm going to start with them being quite vibrant, and then we can see if they just need to be toned down or anything like that. It's nice to see them quite red. So again, this is just another watercolor technique that I'm going to show. Just getting your tissue paper, which is always the best for scooping up any watercolor. You can always scoop it up like that, and then you've got a lovely transparent look, and just move it out like that. And you can go as vibrant or as light as you like. I'm going to start with mine quite like so. Means that we can build on it. The lovely thing about watercolor is they kind of work very well if you do build on them, especially with things like botanical illustration and whatnot. You get your different layers of color from one color rather than necessarily mixing. You can kind of gradually build it up and get different shades. Now our stacks have more stripes than I've painted on them. But again, we'll just see how they look as a suggestion. And don't worry if you don't get in the lines, because you're going to be cutting these out anyway. Right, so we've got our stacks there, and we could do our smaller stacks as well, just to have two options. And if we want, I think that it's never very, very white, as we know. With the stacks, they're probably full of rust, way rustier than they look from afar, but I'm going to just give them a little bit of extra color here. So with this, what I'm doing is I'm just writing the page, and then I'm just going to get my tissue paper. They kind of look like lollipop sticks in the sky, which I really like about them. So you can have multicolored smoke coming out of them. Or if you like, you can just have no smoke at all. Just going to give that a little bit of texture, and then I'm going to go over that with my paintbrush. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brighten up the red around it just a little bit more as well. And there we go. Just make them a little bit more vibrant. And so that it brings out the color of the top of them there. And we can just build around it. And then this is just a cadmium red, but you can use an orangey red if you like. And again, they're done quite, they're not the tidiest stacks, but I quite like that look, and they're going to be chopped off the page anyway. And then we can do the same with this one. We'll just bring up the color there on that one, just if we wanted to do different shapes. So our page now here is dry. And what we'll do is we're going to just get our scissors and we'll just chop out all the different shapes. And you can just see which ones that you'd like to place down. It's a matter of just really creating the image and building it up as you go along. So for those of you very young, I know Heidi mentioned it already, but if you could use a child scissors, and I'm just going to use the scissors that I have on hand, which is very sharp. So as you can see, again, I'll just show this picture. These are kind of all the rocks that are around Sandymount Strand, and they're all those lovely weed-grown rocks. So if you can see all the different shapes there, and they really are many different colors. I've got another picture here, which is the center. So we're going to just create all of those lovely shapes. Again, without overthinking it, because rocks are completely different shapes. So that's the fun thing about doing this. If you were kind of painting the watercolor down, you might feel like you have to be very precise. But with this, we can kind of do our rocks whatever shape we want, because there is no such thing as a perfectly shaped rock. And just placing them down whichever way. And add our weeds and everything like that afterwards. It's quite nice to go on a walk on Bloomsday because you can retrace all the footsteps in Ulysses. Very, very big rock, that one. So I might make that one a bit smaller. Remember, you can use lots of different shades to make gray, so that's the fun thing about it. And although gray is gray, you can get loads of different vibrant kind of colors running through it. So when I was going for a run on Sandymount Strand, it was like here that I saw the rat. It just came out of the rocks and it was eating something, but it was quite fluffy. So it wasn't the worst. Just creating whatever shapes you like. That's the lovely thing about anything with a cut up technique. It just, when you're not thinking about it, I think you can create a lot more interestingly in many ways. If you overthink it, sometimes it's hard to get the shapes. And just keep on cutting out your lovely colors, rock shapes. And you can just imagine what might be in those lovely rocks. You can really do something kind of very creative and imaginative there. You can use this as a base and then you can have something completely different coming out of it. So I'm just going to hold this up just to show you all the different kinds of colors you can get. And this is the one with the just watercolor crayon on top. For those of you who have oil pastels, you can put oil pastels on top of watercolors. Just makes for very nice textures. And this way you can create your Sandymount Strand how you like without having to be too technical about it, and incorporating the cut up technique. Get some dark grays here. Got a bit of the wet on wet technique there, which is quite nice. Probably lots of creatures could be hiding underneath there. I'm just going to place it like this so you can just see it. And again, yeah, that's the lovely thing about watercolor. It's so versatile. So you can do watercolor with watercolor markers, watercolor paints, watercolor pencils, watercolor crayons, watercolor pans, watercolor inks. So it's a really good one to use. If you like it, then great, because you'll never get bored with it. So I'll finish up cutting up the rocks here for a moment so we can move to the next stage and then gradually build. So you can think about what kind of animals might be near there. I think I do like the idea of a seagull being in this scene, and yeah, I do think a little rat coming out from the rocks could be quite funny. There we go. Another thing that you can use if you were doing something like this, I didn't put any glue on the menu on the menu on the material list, because I just thought that it would be nicer for people to just place it how they wish. So you can use glue, but you can have all of your little bits cut up, and then you can kind of decide later on how you want to put it together. but you can use Pritt stick, or double-sided tape is quite a nice thing to use, because it means that you don't have to have it fully stuck down, and that way you can just have, you know, your page is almost like coming to life. So as you can see the way it's placed there, it's quite nice the way it's raised from the page. Especially when it's one piece, it's not a book or doesn't need to be closed. So you could frame it as it's kind of coming off the page. So I'll leave that like that for now. And I'm just going to turn this around and just show you some of the different textures there, different colors. And quite quickly you can get very, very interesting effects with watercolor. They run into one another. We did our blue here earlier. So anyone who might like to use, let's say, a bit of cerulean blue, just going to do that for now for a moment. We have a cerulean blue here. This is a porcelain palette. And there's some cerulean blue mixed there. We also have a more vibrant one here that should be more opaque. If you want, you could make, in Sandymount Strand, there's always that lovely little, there's often a stream in the middle. And to our wet and wet technique, wet on wet, we could add a little bit more cerulean blue if we like. Maybe to here. Show you now. Now, I don't think the stream in Dublin would ever be that vibrant, but I think it is, it's nice for a picture. It's nice to add these different shades of blues, and the sun would hit certain areas and color from the light would come about. So I'm going to do a little bit of cerulean blue there. Very good, affordable watercolors you can get in Evans. You can also get a variety if you want the artist quality either. So I'll set that aside in case anyone would like to put their stream in the picture. And if you see here, we've got our lovely rocks. So coming back to the pen, we can add our greenery, or we can add, you know, using the black pen, you can add the lovely little flowers that are around, the lovely wildflowers, and you can paint them whatever color you want. The mayweed is actually a white color, so we could use the white of the page. Tends to be quite a delicate color. I'm just imagining what they look like. I mean, I have an idea in my head, but as I know I said it earlier, but as James Joyce quotes, shut your eyes and see. So you can imagine whatever kind of shapes you see and just put them within the rocks. It is lovely to see these rocks and know that they were the same around the time when Joyce wrote this. That's kind of the lovely thing about nature, really, isn't it? Although things do change, of course, but those weed-grown rocks are still there. So I'm just doing very scraggly, messy kind of flowers and weeds. And those flowers do have a little bit of yellow in them. So taking to our cadmium yellow, I'm going to get a finer brush. So I'm using a mixture of artist quality. This one is a student quality paint. Just putting in a little bit of yellow there on the area of Sandymount Beach. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when you are going on your walk on Sandymount Beach next time, you can notice them. There are some very interesting wildflowers around that area. I'm just going to do a few more of these. You can do a good way of doing kind of, if you wanted to do a bit of wilderness and wildness and, you know, have it a bit scattered, is you can just do specks of color, you know, and then just get your pen and just join it up, you know, because nature is frazzled, especially the weeds amongst the rocks. So they're just a few little flowers that you see around Sandymount Strand. And now what we will do is, I think we might add some of the chimney stacks. Add just a little bit of white to the sides of some of these rocks, just a bit of texture there with the crayon again. We could do so I'm just going to get that picture again just to show you. It might be hard to see on this, but you can see there, that strip along there now is, people often run along there, but it's usually the sand and then the rocks with the weeds and then the nice pathway that you can run on. So this is kind of the area that we're doing at the moment. We're just going to cut out our stacks. You can make them really, really, really small if you like, or really big. They can take up the whole page. I'm just going to put this here for now. And the wonderful pigeon house, which is so kind of magically eerie with all its kind of broken windows and copper colors. So when you're doing your run along that road or your walking the dog, you see the stacks there in the background. I'll just show you that for now. I haven't stuck anything down yet, and you can make the stacks even smaller. But it's just that little area there. And you can see that if you did use some double-sided tape, you'd be able to stick all the things down just a little bit, but not fully, because it could be quite nice to just have them raised from the page as well. And we have our cerulean blue here for adding a bit of water. You often see people doing water sports as well. And what's so nice is just the sky is always so varied. It's lovely for taking photographs of Sandymount in a pink sky, twilight, and even a grey sky. I think it looks quite lovely. Now we can do our cerulean blue, or as Joyce describes it, we can just finally do a little layer of the snot green sea. So I've just got a piece of paper here, and I'm just going to do another option there, because I think that actually Joyce's description could work better than the blue. We can match it up and see. So yellow and blue will give us green. Our blue mixed here already. I think that's quite a good resemblance of this description. Do a bit of wet on wet for that as well. So whenever you have old pieces of paper lying around, watercolor is best on watercolor paper, but you can do it on brown card, depending if you're only using one layer, it can be quite nice. You can do it on acrylic paper as well. It can work quite nice, especially if it's just for collage. Make sure the base paper is watercolor, but it's nice to paint scraps of paper and then you can just chop them up and assemble them. It's also a good way of reusing things. And in ways it makes your piece a bit more meaningful. So you can kind of collect old bits of paper that have memories. I think it should be actually a little bit darker. I think I'd add a little bit of kind of the grey tones to this. And because it's the sea, you want it to do that lovely technique. Just sometimes you can saturate your page. And I'll just show you now. I think that definitely looks nice and slimy there. I think we have it. Just going to let that dry. So now here we have, I'm going to just turn this around so it's facing the right way. We have just a few extra options there. And what I did with mine is I kept it quite light and quite muted, but you can make your sand as vibrant as you like. I mean, as you can see in this picture here, everything is really luminous because it's a sunny day. And when you're on Sandymount Beach on a sunny day, the sand is actually quite yellow or ochre in color. Whereas today it's definitely probably a little bit gray. So there you go. That's watercolor techniques on Sandymount Strand for Bloomsday. And I hope everything was clear. And if anyone has any questions that they need to ask, please feel free to ask them, or I can email out any answers if anyone has any confusion over any of the steps or anything like that. But this is recorded, so you'll be able to look at it again.